My name is Chloe, and I've spent most of my life trying to figure out how to turn into a puff of smoke. If there were a world championship for most likely to hide behind a sourdough starter, I would have the gold medal sitting right on my kitchen counter. You see, I have this overwhelming, heart-pounding, tongue-tying shyness that makes every social interaction feel like I'm trying to climb Everest in flip-flops. While other people are out there networking and making small talk about the weather, I'm usually busy calculating the shortest route to the nearest exit or practicing how to say hello in my head 20 times before actually whispering it to the floorboards. I don't hate people, I actually love them. I just find the process of being seen by them absolutely terrifying. Gee, it's like there's a spotlight constantly following me, and all I want to do is reach up and unscrew the light bulb. I work at a place called the Golden Whisk. It's a beautiful, sun-drenched cafe with high ceilings and the constant, comforting aroma of roasted coffee and melting butter. To anyone walking in, it looks like a dream. To me, it's a battlefield where my greatest weapon is a whisk and my strongest shield is the swinging kitchen door. I'm the head pastry chef, though if you asked any of the regulars, they'd probably tell you that the tall, charismatic guy with the loud laugh and the perfectly groomed beard, that's Julian, is the genius behind everything. Julian is the executive chef, and he is everything I am not. He's loud, he's confident, and he treats the dining room like his own personal stage. He takes the credit for my lavender-infused honey cakes and my sea salt dark chocolate tarts with a charming wink and a flourish, while I stay tucked away in the back, covered in flour and invisible. I've been at the Golden Whisk for 3 years now, and in all that time, I've probably spoken fewer than 100 words to the customers. My world is the stainless steel tables, the rhythmic ticking of the oven timers, and the silent language of ingredients. I can tell you exactly when a batch of croissants is perfectly proofed just by the way they jiggle, but ask me to explain that to a food blogger, and I'll turn into a statue. It's a frustrating way to live. I have all these recipes swirling in my head, all these stories I want to tell through flavor, but they get stuck. Behind the wall of my anxiety, I watch through the small circular window of the kitchen door as Julian talks to a table of enchanted guests, describing his inspiration for the seasonal fruit galette, an inspiration that actually came to me in a dream about my grandmother's garden. And a part of me aches to step out there and say, that was me. I made that. But then my pulse spikes, my throat tightens, and I turn back to my mixing bowl, retreating into the safety of the steam and the silence. The problem with being the invisible engine behind someone else's success is that eventually, the engine starts to feel a little rusty. Lately, the joy I used to find in the kitchen has been clouded by a heavy sense of invisibility. I'm 27 years old, and I feel like I'm living my life through a foggy window. I go home to my small apartment, talk to my cat, Oliver, who is an excellent listener and never judges my stuttering, and wonder if this is all there is. Am I always going to be the girl in the flour-dusted apron who no one knows? Am I always going to let someone else speak for my heart? I tried to talk to Julian about it once, about maybe putting my name on the menu or having me come out for a special event, but he just patted me on the head like I was a shy puppy and said, "Oh, Chloe, you're so much better off back here. You'd hate the attention. Let me handle the messy part of the business." He called the people who loved my food the messy part. That was the first time I felt a spark of something other than fear. It was a tiny, flickering flame of indignation. That flame got a lot bigger last Tuesday. We received an email that sent the entire cafe into a tailspin. Elias Thorne, the most influential and most brutal food critic in the country, was planning to visit the Golden Whisk on Friday. Elias Thorne doesn't just write reviews. He makes or breaks careers with a single paragraph. If he likes you, you're booked for the next 2 years. If he doesn't, you might as well pack up your rolling pins and go home. Julian was pacing the floor, barking orders at the servers and obsessing over the wine list. Me? I was staring at a bag of organic lemons, feeling a cold weight settle in my chest. This was the moment. The stakes had never been higher. Julian turned to me, his eyes wide with a mix of excitement and ego. Chloe, we need something spectacular. Someth. ING that screams Julian's vision. I want a 5-tier dessert display that looks like a work of modern art. Make it big, make it loud, make it unforgettable. I looked at him, and for the first time, I didn't nod immediately. I didn't say okay in that small, obedient voice. I just looked at the lemons and thought about a simple, perfect tart I'd been experimenting with, a tart that tasted like sunlight and courage. The days leading up to Elias Thorne's visit were a blur of frantic preparation and high-decibel commands from Julian. He wanted extravagance. He wanted gold leaf, spun sugar towers, and dry ice effects that would make the dessert look like it was emerging from a mystical fog. Visuals, Chloe. People eat with their eyes first, he shouted over the hum of the stand mixer. I nod. Ed and worked on his towers of sugar, but in the quiet hours of the early morning, before anyone else arrived at the cafe, I worked on my own project. I practiced my lemon tart. It wasn't loud. It wasn't flashy. It was a thin, buttery shortbread crust with a silky, sharp lemon curd, topped with a cloud-like toasted meringue and a sprinkle of thyme-infused sea salt. It was subtle, elegant, and honest. It was everything I wanted to be but was too afraid to show. The fear of being found out by Julian was almost as bad as the fear of the critic himself. Every time the kitchen door swung open, I would hide my lemon curd behind a stack of mixing bowls. I felt like a secret agent in my own kitchen. Why was I doing this? Why was I risking Julian's wrath for a tart that might never even leave the kitchen? I think it was because, for the first time, the pain of being ignored was starting to outweigh the pain of being noticed. I was tired of being a shadow. I was tired of my talent being used as a prop for someone else's ego. I looked at my reflection in the side of a stainless steel fridge. My hair was a mess under my cap, my cheeks were flushed from the heat, and there were dark circles under my eyes. I looked exhausted, but in my eyes, there was a tiny glint of something I hadn't seen in years. It was defiance. Friday morning arrived with a heavy mist that clung to the windows of the cafe. The atmosphere inside was electric. The servers were polishing the silverware for the 10th time, and Julian was wearing his most expensive chef's whites, looking like he was ready for a photo show. OT. At 1 p.m., a man walked in alone. He was older, wearing a sharp gray suit and a pair of spectacles that seemed to see right through the walls. He didn't look like a man who was impressed by gold leaf or dry ice. He looked like a man who was looking for the truth. That was Elias Thorne. He sat at a small table in the corner, pulled out a notebook, and ordered the tasting menu. In the kitchen, I was a nervous wreck. My hands were shaking so hard I nearly dropped a tray of macarons. Julian was hovering over the line, plating the main courses with frantic precision. Okay, Chloe, get the sugar towers ready, he hissed as the main course plates were cleared from Thorne's table. This is it. The big finish. I looked at the massive, spinning sugar display I'd built for Julian. It was impressive. Sure, but it felt hollow. It felt like a lie. And then I looked at the small, perfect lemon tart sitting on the cooling rack in the corner. My heart started that familiar, terrifying race against my ribs. My breath became shallow. My brain screamed at me to just do what I was told, to stay in the shadows, to let Julian take the stage. But my hands had a mind of their own. As Julian grabbed the large silver tray for the sugar towers, I stepped forward. Julian, I said. My voice was small, but it was there. He didn't hear me. Julian. I said again, louder this time. He stopped and looked at me, his eyebrows shooting up in surprise. What? Not now, Chloe, I'm busy. I took a deep breath, the air feeling thick in my lungs. Don't send the towers. Send the tart. Julian laughed. A short, dismissive sound. The tart? That little thing? Chloe, this is Elias Thorne, not a bake sale. Get out of the way. He pushed past me toward the door. I felt the iron gate in my throat try to slam shut, but I held it open with everything I had. He won't like the towers, Julian. They're all show. He wants something real. Please. Julian ignored me and disappeared through the swinging doors, the sugar tower shimmering under the dining room lights. I sank onto a flour bin, my heart breaking in the quiet of the kitchen. I had tried. I had finally found a sliver of a voice, and it hadn't been enough. Or so I thought. I sat there on that flour bin for what felt like hours, even though I knew it had only been a few minutes. The kitchen, which was usually a symphony of clinking pans, and shouting, had gone strangely quiet. The other line cooks were avoiding my gaze, pretending to be deeply fascinated by the way they were scrubbing their stations. I felt like a ghost haunting my own life. I had finally, for the first time in 27 years, stood up for my work, and I had been swatted away like a fly. The silence of the kitchen felt heavy, like a wet wool blanket pressing down on me. I looked at the lemon tart sitting lonely on the rack. It represented everything I was: quiet, precise, and full of hidden layers. And it was going to end up in the staff bin at the end of the night. But then, the swinging doors burst open. Julian came back into the kitchen, but he didn't look like a man who had just won a war. His face was a pale, blotchy gray, and his expensive chef's W. Heights were stained with something red. He looked at me, and for the first time, I saw actual fear in his eyes. He didn't touch it, Julian whispered, his voice cracking. Elias Thorne. He looked at the sugar tower, poked it with his fork once, and then pushed the entire tray to the edge of the table. He called it a desperate cry for attention from a chef with nothing to say. Julian leaned against the stainless steel table, his hands shaking. He's still sitting there, Chloe. He's waiting. He told the waiter that if the next thing that comes out of this kitchen doesn't have a soul, he's writing the review right now and leaving. My heart did a slow, agonizing somersault. This was it. The nightmare and the dream, all wrapped into one. Julian looked at the lemon tart in the corner, then back at me. He didn't pat me on the head this time. He didn't call me a puppy. Chloe, he said, his voice barely a murmur. Take it out there. Please. I froze. My legs felt like they had been filled with lead. You want me to take it? I whispered, the panic rising in my throat like a flood. I can't go out there, Julian. I'm covered in flour. I don't talk to people. You take it. Julian shook his head, looking genuinely defeated. No. He saw me. He already knows I'm a fraud. He needs to see whoever actually made that tart. Go, Chloe. Save the cafe. Save my career. I didn't have time to think. If I had thought about it for even 1 second, I would have locked myself in the walk-in freezer and never come out. I grabbed a clean white plate, carefully transferred the lemon tart, and added one tiny, fresh sprig of thyme. I wiped my hands on my apron, smoothed down my messy hair, and took a deep, shuddering breath. Every step toward those swinging doors felt like I was walking into a fire. My vision blurred at the edges, and the sound of my own pulse was a deafening drum in my ears. I pushed the door open with my shoulder and stepped into the dining room. The light felt too bright, the air felt too thin, and the eyes of every customer felt like tiny needles on my skin. Elias Thorne was sitting exactly where I'd seen him before. He looked even more intimidating up close, his spectacles glinting in the afternoon light, his expression unreadable. I walked toward his table, my hands trembling so much I was sure the tart would slide right off the plate. I reached the tab. Lo, and stood there, my throat locked, my tongue feeling like a heavy piece of wood. I couldn't say, hello. I couldn't say, enjoy your dessert. I just placed the plate in front of him and looked at the tablecloth, my face burning with a blush that felt like a physical fever. I turned to walk away, to run back to the safety of my flour bins, but then I heard a voice. A low, grovelly voice that commanded the entire room. Wait, he said. Don't leave yet. I stopped dead in my tracks. I didn't turn around immediately. I just stood there, staring at a smudge on the wooden floor, praying for a sudden earthquake to swallow me whole. My heart was beating so fast I was sure it was going to burst through my ribs. Turn around, Chef, Elias Thorne said. It wasn't a request, it was an order. I slow. Ly turned, my hair falling over my eyes, my shoulders hunched. I looked like a caught rabbit. Thorn wasn't looking at me though. He was looking at the tart. He picked up his small silver fork and took a tiny, deliberate bite. He closed his eyes. The entire cafe seemed to go silent. I could hear the ticking of the clock on the wall and the distant sound of a car horn outside. I waited for him to spit it out, to tell me it was too sour or that the crust was too hard. He opened his eyes and looked at me. For a moment, the sternness in his expression softened, replaced by a flicker of genuine surprise. "The sugar towers were a lie," he said softly, his voice carrying through the quiet dining room. "But this is a conversation. Who are you?" I opened my mouth, but no sound came out. I tried again, my vocal cords straining against the iron gate of my shyness. "See, Chloe," I finally whispered. My voice sounded thin and strange, like a radio signal from another planet. Thorn nodded slowly. "Chloe, the pastry chef. Why haven't I heard your name before? Why does the menu say Julian's signature collection?" I didn't know how to answer. I couldn't throw Julian under the bus, even though he had been doing it to me for years. I just looked at my flour-dusted shoes. "This tart," Thorn continued, gesturing with his fork, "has a narrative. It's a story of restraint, of hidden depth, and of a very specific kind of courage. It's the best thing I've eaten in the city in 5 years. But it doesn't match the man who just tried to sell me a sugar sculpture." He leaned back in his chair, his eyes narrowing behind his spectacles. "You've been hiding, haven't you, Chloe? You've been letting someone else take your sunlight." I felt a tear prick at the corner of my eye. It was so overwhelming to be seen, really seen, by a stranger who understood my work better than my own boss did. I managed a tiny, almost imperceptible nod. "Well," Thorn said, picking up his notebook, "I think it's time the world heard the truth. Go back to your kitchen, Chloe. But don't you dare go back into the shadows." I walked back to the kitchen in a daze. When I pushed through the swinging doors, the entire staff was waiting. Julian was standing by the pass, his face a mixture of relief and jealousy. "What did he say?" Julian asked, his voice urgent. I looked at him, really looked at him, and for the first time, I didn't feel small. I didn't feel like a puppy. I felt like a guardian. "He liked it," I said. My voice was quiet, but it didn't shake. "He said it was the best thing he's eaten in 5 years. A cheer went up from the line cooks, but Julian stayed silent. He knew what this meant. The dynamic had shifted. The engine had finally decided it wanted to be the car. That night, I went home and sat on my balcony, looking out at the city lights. I felt exhausted, but it was a different kind of tired than before. It was the exhaustion of a battle won. I pulled out my own notebook and started writing a new recipe. Not a Julian's Vision recipe. A Chloe's Truth recipe. I realized that my shyness was still there. I was still the girl who would rather talk to a cat than a crowd, but it didn't have the power to mute me anymore. I had learned that my food could speak for me when my voice couldn't. I had found a way to be heard without having to shout. As the cool night air brushed against my face, I felt a strange, new sensation. It was a sense of belonging. I wasn't a ghost anymore. I was a chef. And for the first time in my life, I couldn't wait for tomorrow to begin. The morning after Elias Thorne's visit was the quietest and yet loudest morning of my life. I woke up to the sound of my phone buzzing against the nightstand like an angry hornet. I usually keep it on silent because even a notification can make me jump, but today was different. I opened my eyes and saw a barrage of messages from the cafe's group chat. Then I saw it, the review. Thorne had published a sneak peek on his social media and his blog. The headline read, "The Ghost in the Kitchen, Finding the Soul of the Golden Whisk." He wrote about the sugar towers being a monument to ego, but then he spent 3 whole paragraphs describing my lemon tart. He called me by name. Chloe. He told the world that I was the true heart of the establishment. I sat on the edge of my bed, clutching my duvet, feeling a wave of nausea that had nothing to do with what I'd eaten. My secret was out. The protective shell I had built around myself for years had been cracked open by a man with a silver fork. I should have been happy. This was what every chef dreams of, but all I could think about was the walk from the front door of the cafe to the kitchen. How many people would be looking at me? How many people would want to talk to me? My shyness wasn't just a personality trait, it was a physical weight, and right now it felt like I was being asked to carry a mountain. I considered calling in sick, or better yet, moving to a different country and starting a new life as a professional hermit. But I thought about the way the lemon tart tasted, sharp and clear, and I realized I couldn't go back. I dragged myself out of bed, put on my uniform, and took the bus to work. Every time someone on the bus looked in my direction, I felt my skin prickle, convinced they had read the review and were judging the ghost in the corner. When I arrived at the cafe, there was already a line of people outside. A line. At 7 a.m. My heart started its usual frantic drumming. I ducked my head, pulled my cap low, and tried to slip through the side entrance. There she is, a voice shouted. It was one of the servers, Sarah. She ran over and hugged me, nearly knocking me over. Chloe, have you seen the internet? You're famous. People are calling and asking if the Lemon Girl is working today. The Lemon Girl. Great. I now had a nickname. I hurried into the kitchen, desperate for the familiar smell of yeast and the safety of my workstation. Julian was already there, but he wasn't barking orders. He was standing by the window, staring at the line of people outside. He looked at me as I walked in, and for the first time, there was no condescension in his eyes. There was something else, a strange mixture of resentment and realization. We're going to be sold out by noon, he said, his voice flat. The owner, Kaye. He wants to change the menu. He wants her name on the front window. I froze, my hand halfway to my apron string. The window. I whispered. Julian, no. I can't. I don't want my name on a window. I just want to bake. Julian let out a dry, bitter laugh. It's too late for that, Chloe. You opened the door. Now you have to walk through it. The rest of the week was a blur of flour, sweat, and social exhaustion. The cafe was packed from open to close, and every single person wanted the lemon tart. I was making dozens of them a day, my hands moving with a precision that was almost robotic. But the hardest part wasn't the work, it was the visibility. Every hour or so, a customer would ask the server if they could meet the chef. Julian would look at me, and I would look at the floor. Shaking my head so hard I thought my neck would snap. She's very busy, Julian would tell them, and I could hear the slight edge of annoyance in his voice. He was used to being the star, and now he was the gatekeeper for someone who didn't even want to be seen. One afternoon, during a rare 5-minute break, I went to the back alley to get some air. I was leaning against the brick wall, staring at a patch of weeds when a man walked by. He wasn't a customer. He looked like he belonged in a library or an art gallery. He stopped and looked at me. You look like you're hiding, he said. I jumped, my heart skipping a beat. I didn't recognize him at first, but then I saw the sketchbook in his hand. It was Thomas, a local artist who often sat in the cafe for hours, drawing the customers. I had seen him from the kitchen window many times. I'm not hiding, I lied, my voice trembling. I'm just taking a break. Thomas smiled, a gentle, slow smile that didn't feel like a spotlight. It's okay to be a ghost, you know, he said, leaning against the opposite wall. I spend my whole life watching people from a distance. That's how you see the things they try to hide. But eventually, you have to show people what you've seen. Otherwise, the art just rots inside you. I looked at him, surprised. Usually, people told me to get over it or just be more confident. No one had ever told me that being a ghost was okay. I'm just a baker, I muttered. Thomas laughed quietly. And I'm just a guy with a pencil. But Thorne didn't write about a baker. He wrote about a story. He wrote about the courage it takes to be subtle in a world that's screaming. He reached into his bag and pulled out a small piece of paper. I drew this while I was eating your tart yesterday, he said, handing it to me. It was a charcoal sketch of my hand, holding a whisk. But the way he had drawn the light made it look like the whisk was a magic wand, and the flour dust in the air looked like stars. That's what your work feels like, he said. Don't let the noise of the crowd drown out the music you're making. He turned and walked away before I could even say thank you. I stood there, holding the sketch, feeling a strange sense of calm. The iron gate in my throat felt a little lighter. I realized that I didn't have to become Julian to be successful. I didn't have to be loud. I just had to be honest. I went back into the kitchen, and for the first time that week, I didn't pull my cap down. I looked Julian in the eye and said, I'll go out. Julian blinked, his mouth falling open slightly. What? I cleared my throat, my heart still racing, but my hands were steady. The next person who asks to see the chef. I'll go out and say hello. But only for a minute. Julian stared at me for a long beat, then a slow, genuine smile spread across his face. Okay, Chloe, he said. Only for a minute. An hour later, an elderly woman who had traveled 2 hours just to try my dessert asked to see me. I walked through those swinging doors, my face red and my palms damp, but I did it. I said, thank you for coming, and I even managed to smile. The world didn't end. The spotlight didn't burn me. I was still shy, and I was still Chloe, but I was no longer a ghost. I was a person who made stars out of flour. The week following my decision to actually show my face was a confusing whirlwind of emotions. On one hand, every time I stepped out from behind those swinging doors, I felt like a glitch in a video game, like I wasn't supposed to be there, and the air was too thin to breathe. On the other hand, seeing the genuine joy on people's faces when they spoke to me about my food started to do something to my heart. It was like a slow thaw after a very long winter. I realized that my shyness had convinced me that people were judges waiting to find me guilty, but in reality, most of them were just people looking for a moment of sweetness in a bitter world. My lemon tart wasn't just a RT, it was a bridge. However, fame, even the small-scale, local cafe kind, comes with a price tag I hadn't realized I'd have to pay. The owner of the Golden Whisk, a man named Mr. Henderson who cared more about spreadsheets than sourdough, decided that the Chloe effect needed to be capitalized on immediately. He started showing up at the cafe every morning, talking about brand expansion and merchandising. He wanted me to film short videos for social media, Chloe's Kitchen Secrets, where I would look into a camera and explain my techniques. The mere thought of it made me want to hide in a giant bag of flour. Mr. Henderson, I tried to say during one of our meetings, my voice barely reaching across the table. I'm a baker, not a performer. I can't talk to a camera. Mr. Henderson just laughed, that loud, hollow businessman laugh that makes you feel like a product on a shelf. Nonsense, Chloe. You're the face of the brand now. People love the shy girl act. It's part of the charm. Just be yourself, but, a more vocal version of yourself. He didn't understand that for someone like me, there is no vocal version of myself that feels authentic. Whenever I tried to force a sentence out for a video, I sounded like a robot with a dying battery. Julian, surprisingly, became my unexpected ally in this. He saw me struggling one afternoon when the marketing team was trying to get me to smile more while holding a rolling pin. He stepped in, his tall frame blocking the camera lens. That's enough, he said firmly. She's a chef. If you want a model, hire one. If you want the best pastry in the city, let her work. That night, Julian and I stayed late to prep for a large catering order. The cafe was empty, the only sound being the low hum of the refrigerators and the occasional car passing by outside. We worked in silence for a while, side by side at the stainless steel station. Thanks for earlier, I said, the words coming out more easily in the quiet of the night. Julian didn't look up from the chocolate he was tempering. Don't mention it. I spent years being the voice, while you were the soul, Chloe. I know how loud the world can get. But Henderson is right about one thing. The cafe is changing. And you're the one steering the ship now, whether you like it or not. I looked at my hands, calloused and stained with vanilla bean. I don't want a ship, Julian. I just want a kitchen. I know, he said, finally looking at me. But you can't go back to being a ghost. Thorne's review made sure of that. The question is, how are you going to be a leader when you're still afraid to ask for a coffee at the deli? He wasn't being mean, he was being honest. It was the question I had been avoiding. I had found my voice through my food, but now I needed to find it for myself. I needed to protect my kitchen, my staff, and my sanity from people like Henderson. As I left the cafe that night, the moon was a bright, silver coin in the sky. I thought about Thomas, the artist, and his sketch of my hand as a magic wand. I realized that leadership didn't have to mean shouting orders. Maybe, for me, leadership meant setting the tone of the silence. The real test came a few days later when Henderson announced a grand relaunch gala. He invited all the city's elite, more food critics, and, to my absolute horror, a local television crew. He wanted me to stand on a small stage and give a speech about the philosophy of the lemon tart. Every time I thought about it, my stomach did a violent flip. I couldn't sleep. I couldn't eat. I spent my nights staring at the ceiling, practicing speeches that ended in me tripping over the microphone and dying of embarrassment. The iron gate in my throat felt like it had been welded shut. I was back in that dark place where my fear was a physical wall, towering over me. The day of the gala arrived, and the cafe was transformed into a high society ballroom. There were white linens, expensive flowers, ND people in suits and sparkling dresses. I stayed in the kitchen as long as I could, hiding behind a mountain of chocolate eclairs. But eventually, the time came. Henderson walked into the kitchen, looking impatient. Chloe, you're on in 5. Don't let us down. I looked at Julian, a silent plea for help in my eyes. He walked over and handed me a small, bitter piece of dark chocolate. Focus on the flavor, Chloe. Not the people. Just tell them what you told the tart. I took a deep breath, the air feeling like sandpaper in my throat, and walked out into the lion's den. The stage was small, but to me, it felt like it was 10 miles high. I stood behind the podium, the bright television lights blinding me. I could see hundreds of blurred faces, all waiting for me to speak. I opened my mouth. But nothing came out. The silence stretched on, becoming awkward, then painful. I could hear people whispering. I could see Henderson in the wings, looking frantic. I felt that familiar, overwhelming urge to run, to disappear, to be that puff of smoke I'd always dreamed of. My vision started to swim. And then I saw him. Thomas, the artist, was standing at the very back, leaning against a pillar. He wasn't wearing a suit. He was in his paint-stained jacket, and he was holding up his sketchbook. He turned the page, and on it, in big, bold charcoal letters, he had written, "Stay in the ghost room." It was a reference to what he'd said before, that it's okay to see the world from a distance. It was a reminder that I didn't have to be a vocal version of myself. I just had to be the person who noticed the moss and the thyme. I closed my eyes for a second, feeling the weight of the quartz-like stillness inside me. When I opened them, I didn't look at the cameras. I didn't look at Henderson. I looked at Thomas, and then I looked at the plate of tarts sitting on the table next to the stage. I don't like talking, I said. My voice was quiet, but because of the microphone, it filled the room like a soft breeze. The whispering stopped. I've spent my whole life being afraid of this moment. But I'm not afraid when I'm in the kitchen. In the kitchen, everything makes sense. A lemon tart isn't just sugar and fruit. It's a way of saying I see you without having to use words. It's a way of being quiet and powerful at the same time. I spoke for only 2 minutes. I didn't use big words, and I didn't tell any jokes. I just talked about the honesty of ingredients. When I finished, there was no explosion of applause at first, just a deep, resonant silence. And then, slowly, the room began to clap. Not the polite, corporate clap, but something warm and real. I stepped off the stage, my legs shaking, and practically ran back to the kitchen. I leaned against the cool metal door, my heart finally slowing down. I had done it. I hadn't become a different person. I had just used my own language to explain who I was. Julian was there, holding a glass of water. "Not bad, lemon girl," he said with a wink. Not bad at all. That night, after the gala ended and the lights were dimmed, I found Thomas waiting by the back door. "You didn't run," he said, handing me a small sketch. He'd made during my speech. It was of me, but instead of looking scared, I looked like I was glowing. I wanted to, I admitted. But I realized that if I don't speak, Henderson will speak for me. And I'd rather whisper my own truth than have someone else shout a lie about me. He nodded, and for the first time, I didn't feel like a ghost in a crowd. I felt like a storyteller who had finally found her medium. The months following the gala were a lesson in balance. The lemon girl phenomenon didn't fade away as I had secretly hoped it might. Instead, it grew into something more permanent. The Golden Whisk was no longer just a cafe, it was a destination. But the biggest change wasn't the length of the line outside or the fact that my name was now etched in elegant gold script on the front. Tea window. The real change was internal. I had stopped viewing my shyness as a broken part of my soul that needed fixing. I started seeing it as a filter, a way to ensure that everything I put out into the world, whether it was a tart or a sentence, was deliberate and true. I was still the girl who preferred the back of the bus, and I still felt a spike of panic when the phone rang, but I was no longer a prisoner of those feelings. I was the one holding the keys. Mr. Henderson eventually realized that he couldn't turn me into a loud, media-savvy superstar, and to my surprise, he stopped trying. He saw that my quietness was actually our biggest selling point. People didn't just come for the food, they came for the atmosphere of peace and authenticity that I insisted on maintaining. I made hangs to the kitchen, too. I started a mentorship program for young, quiet chefs who felt overlooked in the loud, aggressive world of professional cooking. I wanted to create the sanctuary I never had. Julian stayed on as my partner, and our dynamic evolved into something beautiful. He handled the logistics and the shouting while I handled the vision and the soul. We were a team of opposites, a symphony of loud and soft that worked perfectly because we finally respected each other's volume. My friendship with Thomas, the artist, became the quiet center of my life. We spent our Monday mornings, the only time the cafe was closed, walking through the city's botanical gardens or sitting in old, dusty libraries. We didn't talk much, and we didn't have to. Sometimes, he would draw, and I wow. LD write down ideas for new flavor combinations. One rainy afternoon, while we were sitting in a small conservatory surrounded by ferns, he looked at me and said, "You're not a ghost anymore, Chloe. You're more like the wind. People can't always see you, but they can definitely feel your impact." I smiled, a real, unforced smile. "I think I like being the wind," I said. "It's a lot more powerful than smoke." The climax of my professional journey came when I was asked to contribute a chapter to a prestigious international culinary book about the future of flavor. They wanted me to write about my philosophy. I spent weeks sitting at my small kitchen table at home, all over the cat purring at my feet, trying to find the right words. I didn't write about techniques or temperature control. I wrote about the courage to be quiet. I wrote about how the most profound flavors are the ones that don't try to drown out everything else, but instead, invite you to slow down and listen. When the book was published and I saw my name in the table of contents, I didn't feel the urge to hide. I felt a sense of quiet, solid pride. I had told my story, and I had done it on my own terms. Looking back at the girl I was a year ago, I barely recognize her. She was so small, so huddled, so convinced that her voice didn't matter. I want to reach back through time and give her a hug, or maybe just hand her a whisk and tell her it's going to be okay. I've realized that the world is a very noisy place, and it's easy to believe that the only way to be successful is to be the loudest person in the room. Boo. That's a lie. The world needs the observers. It needs the people who notice the way the light hits a lemon or the way a sprig of thyme smells after it's been crushed. It needs the people who speak only when they have something meaningful to say. My shyness is my superpower because it forces me to be present, to be careful, and to be kind. I still work at the Golden Whisk, but I'm no longer tucked away in the shadows. I move through the kitchen with a sense of purpose that doesn't require a raised voice. When a new cook joins the team and I see that familiar look of panic in their eyes, the way they try to shrink into the background, I walk over to them. I don't give them a big, booming welcome. I just hand them a bowl of something delicious and say, "It's okay to be quiet here. We hear you." Anyway, seeing the tension leave their shoulders is a better feeling than any 5-star review I've ever received. I've learned that the best kind of leadership is the kind that creates a space where everyone feels safe enough to be themselves, even the ones who want to turn into puffs of smoke. Last night, Thomas and I went to an art gallery to see an exhibition of his latest work. In the center of the room, there was a massive canvas that took up an entire wall. It was a painting of a kitchen, not a bright, clinical space, but a warm, atmospheric world filled with golden light and floating flour dust. And there, right in the center, was a figure. It was me, but it wasn't a literal portrait. It was an impression of a person who was completely at peace, focused on the task at hand, radiant. A quiet, steady strength. The title of the painting was The Language of the Heart. As I stood there, surrounded by people I didn't know, I realized I wasn't shaking. I wasn't looking for the exit. I was just standing there, being seen, and it was okay. My life isn't a movie with a dramatic ending. There was no big, "I'm not shy anymore" moment. I still struggle. I still blush when someone pays me a compliment, and I still prefer a quiet night with a book over a big party. But the difference is that I'm no longer fighting myself. I've accepted that I am a quiet person in a loud world, and there is a profound beauty in that. As I walk through the cafe doors every morning and smell the butter and the lemon, I feel a deep, grounding sense of gratitude. I am Chloe. I am a chef. I am a store. A teller. And I have found that the most beautiful songs are the ones that start as a whisper. The end of my story isn't about finding a loud voice. It's about the fact that even a whisper, when it's honest, can change the world.